How do we learn? Kids, adults, all of us. One way is observing our own mistakes. I'm especially interested in mistakes in work and those made by education policymakers, district leaders, school principals, school board trustees, and teachers. In fact, my interest in this led me to write this book, Mismeasuring Schools Vital Signs, together with my friend Jill Wins, who was a trustee on the board of San Francisco Unified School District for 24 years. We put our stories together about the many ways that schools are misjudged, how time and money are wasted pursuing flawed educational improvements, how students are misclassified when teachers misunderstand evidence of learning, how policy leaders embrace the wrong curricular approach and then legislators bake that into laws. I think you know the kind of mistakes I'm talking about. I'm sure you see them where you work. Let me share with you a little personal aside about how I discovered these stories. For over 20 years, I've led a small firm in California that's helped over 240 districts make sense of their school's vital signs. While I've not been a classroom teacher or principal, I've worked closely with them as analytic partner. And from that vantage point, I've grown astonished at how rarely educators recognize errors in professional judgment. In fact, the word error rarely appears in the literature searches I performed in the course of writing this book. We all make mistakes, but how do we recognize that moment of error? And who notices when people make these mistakes? And then who makes the pressure to not name the problem that perhaps everyone can see? All of this reminds me of the fable of the emperor's new clothes. Do you remember the story? A little boy sees the king walking down the street with not a shred of clothes on, and the townspeople pretend he's fully dressed. Eventually, the townspeople turn to recognize that what the boy is calling out for true is in fact worth proclaiming. John Hattie is in that role when he raises similar questions in his book, Visible Learning. In fact, he wonders if those who manage schooling and deliver teaching are ready to make errors visible. Consider this quote from his book. After describing the impact in medicine of the evidence-based revolution, Hattie makes this observation. The key question, he says, is whether teaching can shift from an immature to a mature profession, from opinions to evidence, from subjective judgments and personal contact to critique of judgments. Let's get a bead on this phenomenon in the education profession by comparing it to other fields. In other professions, people note errors, and most often they're reported. Errors in engineering are visible, and there's no way to hide them. When engineers make a mistake, buildings start leaning like this new skyscraper in San Francisco. Or worse, bridges fall down as the Tacoma Narrows Bridge did in 1940. Consider medicine. Errors in medicine are harder to see, but the traditions in patient care require a high degree of candor and a formal reporting of errors. Let's do an experiment. I'd like you to guess what the reported error rate of nurses' mistakes in the U.S. might be when administering medication to patients in hospitals. Please write that down. Now a second guess. Take a stab at this. What's the error rate of doctors when they diagnose illnesses of patients? Write that down next, please. Here are the answers to both questions. Nurses' medication error rates, 8 to 25%. And that affects about 10% of hospital patients. Doctors' diagnostic error rate, 10 to 15%. Shocked? Surprised? I certainly was. But the good news is this: these error rates in medicine are knowable, and people take steps to lower them. But in the profession of education, are error rates knowable? I don't think so. But for your benefit, I'd like to offer one very interesting example that is the exception to this generalization and it begins to provide a sober look at how high it might be. I want to look at the rate at which California teachers misinterpreted their students' test results. For this insight, we owe thanks to the scholarship of Jenny Rankin. Here's Jenny delivering a TED Talk. In her 2011 study of over 200 California teachers, she presented them with a series of very conventional reports of the statewide test given each spring, called the California Standards Test. No surprise. She followed each page of reporting with a few multiple choice questions about the meaning of the results displayed. These were, for the most part, simply calling on teachers to make interpretive judgments of the data in the reports, all of it expressed either in simple data tables or bar charts or line trend graphs. She was testing the following hypothesis. If you applied professional standards, like medical labeling requirements do, to conventional reports of student test scores, would fewer teachers misinterpret the reports? Her hypothesis is that it would. And good news, it turns out her hypothesis was correct. She observed a 3 to 4 time improvement in teacher accuracy compared to teacher accuracy when the reports were in their original, less polished form. However, there was a surprise. She was shocked to discover that the higher rate of correct interpretations made from the very best versions of these reports was just 48%. In other words, half the time teachers interpreted those reports correctly and half the time they interpreted them incorrectly. Ms. Rankin followed up her study with 2 books on standards for test score data reporting. She called her recommendations over-the-counter data standards, and her books offered guidelines like these. You may be wondering, as I did, what impacts her books and ideas had on the field. Did they spark a debate about the underpreparation of teachers in America? Did they lead schools of education to change their curricula so graduates are finally data savvy and assessment literate? Did they lead to assessment directors investing more time improving teacher judgment? I'm here to say that what I see in California is the answer to all 3 questions has been no. But teachers are not the only ones making mistakes, and I'm sure you know that already. But let's look now at an example for those who manage instruction, curriculum at the district level, administrative leadership. I'm going to walk you through an example of a California district that in its strategic plan and in its annual plan failed to mention that when its students reached middle school, grade 6, their math scores show signs of serious trouble. The evidence became visible when our K12 Measures team reorganized their state results in 2 ways. First, we looked at same students over 5 years' time, simply graduating class cohorts. Second, we viewed their results within a context of 15 districts whose students were highly similar to their own in 3 ways: parent education level, household income, and English language fluency. This enabled us to isolate as much as possible the effect of schools on students by controlling for what students bring to school from home. I'll show you now what we observed. Let me orient you to what we're displaying here. We're looking at results on 2 tests, English language arts to the left, and math to the right. The orange dot is the client district. We're looking at the same kids tested 3 times in 5 years. The gray dots that are ghosted in the background are the 15 districts with highly similar students. On the horizontal axis, you'll see the year the students took the test and the grade level they were in that year. And on the vertical axis is the average scale score result. That thin black horizontal bar across each column of dots is the state average scale score for all California students who took that test that year. Let's start with math results for these students in 3rd grade in 2018 for this graduating class of 2027. They scored higher than most of their similar districts and quite close to the state average scale score in 3rd grade. In 4th grade, they held their own. But by 2022, when they hit 7th grade, they fell in their position relative to the state average scale score, and they now fall close to the bottom of the set of similar districts But were they an exception? Let's look at the next graduating class of 2026. They were 8th graders in 2022. Note how similar their pattern is to the pattern of results for the class of 2027. Students who started out meeting the state average scale score in 3rd grade ended up far from it by the end of 8th grade. And they were at the bottom of the stack of similar districts. In this case, too, you can see that pattern was not visible in English language arts. One more example, the graduating class of 2025. They were 6th graders in 2019, which is the last year for which we have results. Here's why: 9th graders just don't take the state assessments in the US. Again, a similar pattern is visible. The SAG of math scores has a consistent beginning in grade 6. This holds true for the next 2 graduating class cohorts. Here's 2024 and 2023. How do we know that the district's results were not primarily caused by the pandemic? Let's take a quick look back at the class of 2026 again. But a neighboring district, just down the road, it appears in blue, has highly similar students who tracked our orange district students closely in grades 3, 4, and 5. Again, they're that blue dot. By the time they all get to grade 8, the neighboring district students come close to maintaining their prior position. Our orange district did not. Okay, what makes this long-standing pattern invisible to those in charge of that district? I have 2 guesses. Guess 1. They're just accustomed to looking at student results by grade level each year. This answers the question, how are this year's 7th graders doing compared to 7th graders in prior years? But is that the right question? If you want to know how students' mastery of math changes over time, that's not the right question. Guess 2, the state of California has no growth measure in its accountability system. All it offers is a measure of 1 year's change in student scores for an entire school. So the entity they're reporting upon is all students in that school, grades 6, 7, and 8. That's really no help if the question you want to answer is how much relative growth your students have attained while studying math in your school or district. This has the effect of adding to what I'll call the emperor's new clothes syndrome. One more case in point deserves attention. Policy errors, the kind made by policy leaders in government or policy advisors on the staffs of legislators. Let's start with a map of the United States. For every county and state, it shows the degree to which students' reading scores on state assessments were above or below grade level. It covers 260 million students' results on state assessments over the years 2009 through 2018. The map was created by Jeremy Nay's American Inequality Project, and the underlying data they used was created by Sean Reardon's remarkably talented team at the Stanford Educational Opportunity Project. Blue indicates above grade level. Red indicates below grade level. And the intensity of the colors signifies how far above or below grade level students' results may be. The estimated difference in reading skill between the darkest blue and the deepest red is a 4 grade level spread. So take a look. Do you notice the distinct clustering of blue in most of the North Central states and the North Atlantic states? Do you notice that the Southwestern states are predominantly red? Texas is one of the few states that is a mishmash of blue and red counties, with West Texas tending red, East Texas tending toward a mix of neutral and blue. Let's take a closer look at California. In looking at the state that was my home for close to 60 years, I have to ask whether errors in human judgment by policy leaders may have caused this sea of red. I've identified Santa Cruz County here because it's home for a University of California campus and also home to some high-tech industries. What could have caused this? Well, here's a very short version of a 3-decade-long story. In the 1990s, the California Department of Education favored a way to teach reading they called whole language. Some of you may remember that phrase from the reading curricula wars of that era. Many years later, the Cal Department of Ed reversed itself and declared themselves to be neutral on the question of how to teach reading. And that position of neutrality remains today. This left each of California's 1,000 districts free to choose how to teach reading, and it left the universities that prepared new teachers free to choose their own approach. Well, here's evidence of the result of these policy decisions that, together with many, many other factors, have led to this result. This evidence is from the National Assessment of Educational Progress of 2019. It shows the reading scores of fourth grade students by state. Where's California? It is 41st on this list. Of course, this comparison does not take into account the differences among students state by state. So, admittedly, it's a rough comparison, but it's one that confirms the other signs of California's problems. One other note on policy errors. California is also one of the 11 states that still does not require dyslexia screening. Dyslexia is the most common learning disability, affecting 7 to 15% of people, and that's true in most countries. Of course, if you screen for dyslexia, you can teach dyslexic students differently, giving them the type of instruction that is matched to the way they process written language. These two factors, the state agencies favoring whole language methods and the legislature's failure to require dyslexia screening, these contributed substantially to this dreadful outcome. In my opinion, these were policy errors, and the good news is that today, many educators, parents, and advocates are saying the same thing. They're saying that these policies were an error and should now be corrected. Let's hope that those in positions of authority listen. I hope I've made a persuasive case for greater candor facing up to mistakes in judgment. It's an argument for building better evidence that reveals problems, of course, but it's an argument too for reasoning more clearly. Perhaps it's a moment to invoke the spirit of Star Trek's rational Mr. Spock at your side. But if you want more than Spock's spirit at your side, you could also start a study session using John Hattie's terrific book, Visible Learning, together with my book, Mismeasuring Schools Vital Signs, to start the conversation. Both books take a look at errors of the past and present and should help you avoid them in the future. Honestly, I wish we were live because then I could take questions. But since we're not, I'll leave you with just one precaution. I don't think teachers need to become data analysts. I don't think that's the right route, although I'm aware this is a very popular idea. I would rather see teachers and principals served by data analysts. I'd like to have educators possess what doctors have, diagnostic decision support. I want educators to have technical analysts and program evaluators at their side who are better prepared to build evidence and interpret it correctly. I also want educators to be able to harness computer power to augment teacher decision-making. Doctors have Isabel. It's an inference engine that's 12 years old and has made inroads into the practice of the diagnostic part of medicine. Doctors tell Isabel about the patient's symptoms, then about the patient, and then Isabel checks the research literature it's been fed, and then references the case studies it's ingested, and then Isabel offers diagnostic suggestions. Isabel and its competitors augment doctors' judgment. They do not replace it. The current portfolio of test reporting that I've reviewed simply puts red, green, and yellow stoplights in front of teachers. This is not diagnostic decision support. By the way, other professions have added technical analysts to their teams. Athletic clubs, pro sports teams have been at this for years with great success. Education organizations can create the same advances by adding staff with analytic capabilities, staff who are ready, willing, and able to help teachers and administrators make better sense of students and schools' vital signs. Okay, thanks for your interest. I welcome your comments and questions, and if you'd like me to send you references I cited in this talk and a list of recommended readings, just email me at the following address, steve.rees@schoolwisepress.com. Thanks very much.